In the world of One Piece, very few characters have ever reached the peak of piracy. While some would argue that only Goldie Roger, the first and so far only Pirate King, can claim to have truly reached the summit of power for a pirate, his passing marked a new age for the seas. An age which was dominated by emperors. The Yonko reigned unimpeded for over 20 years, untouchable by any pirate or marine. That is, until the latest generation had set sail in order to attempt to claim their titles for their own. While the Yonko were always viewed as equals, the truth is far different, because even among the strongest, there are disparities in their strength. In today's video, this is exactly what I'm going to be looking at, as we analyze every single Yonko's feats and achievements in order to rank them from the weakest to the strongest. I will point out before we get into this though, that regardless of where any character is placed on this list, for the most part there are no weak Yonko. Each and every one of them are absolute monsters in their own right, and in general the difference in the power between them as a whole is pretty damn small. Starting in D rank, we have undoubtedly the weakest pirate to ever achieve the rank of Yonko, and it's none other than Buggy the Clown. Strangely, in terms of feats, Buggy is actually well justified in achieving the title of Yonko. He is a former member of the Pirate King's crew, he's a former warlord of the sea, he's an escapee from Impel Down, and he had fought during the Marineford War. When you look into it, his resume is pretty stacked, but much like many people in the real world, being impressive on paper doesn't always correlate to real life. And this is very much the case for Buggy, who was initially introduced as a gag character and has remained that way for the entirety of One Piece. Buggy's progression up the ladder of pirate supremacy has long been a running joke in the series, and while his status may now be high, his strength is the exact opposite. He had lost to Luffy all the way back in the East Blue Saga, and he had been captured by the Marines and sent to Impel Down not too long after this. Buggy is a cunning character, and he combines this trait with his impressive reputation, which had allowed him to become a Yonko in the first place. He had managed to trick Zoro into thinking that he'd been defeated before, inflicting a significant wound on him during the Orange Town arc, and he was almost successful in killing Luffy in Log Town. Then later on, he had capitalized on the reputation that he had earned from Marineford in order to acquire a powerful crew and to cement his status within the world as a warlord. But at the level of Yonko, no amount of wit and cunning is really going to be able to overcome the vast difference in strength between Buggy and the rest of the people on this list. However, through a convenient stroke of luck, this is another issue that Buggy has somehow managed to solve, because in truth his status as a Yonko is nothing more than a facade designed to take the attention away from the two powerhouses who are backing him. They are of course the former warlords Dracule Mihawk and Sir Crocodile. Now I'm not going to be ranking these two since they aren't technically Yonkos, but if I had to, then Crocodile would be the weakest, since he had taken considerable damage from Diamond Jozu during Marineford, which no one else on the list would have. Mihawk would be far more difficult to place since we have yet to see him take part in a serious battle. If you want my opinion, I think that Mihawk would put up a decent fight against even the very strongest of Yonkos. Next up on the list, we have the Yonko that fall into the rank C category, and this is the group which I feel will prove to be the most controversial by far. In this rank, we have Marshall D. Teach, captain of the Blackbeard Pirates. So naturally, I do have justification for what I feel will be an unpopular placing, though admittedly for Blackbeard, I am essentially basing this off the tiny amounts of information that we have on him, the majority of which is taken from events that had occurred pre-time skip. Blackbeard's feats in the series so far comprise of beating Ace in their famous fight on Bonora Island, getting defeated in one attack by Magellan in Impel Down, and only being saved thanks to the fortunate intervention of Shiryu of the Rain, getting embarrassed and almost killed by Whitebeard at Marineford before stealing his former captain's devil fruit, defeating the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates in the Payback War during the time skip, and finally beating both Boa Hancock and Trafalgar Law in separate fights after the time skip. The issue with this though, and the reason why Blackbeard finds himself in the C tier, is that most of these achievements are not actually all that impressive. Blackbeard's only notable achievement among those listed is defeating Ace, Boa Hancock and Trafalgar Law. But while each of these characters are undeniably strong, any Yonko would be expected to beat them in a fight, with at most moderate difficulty. The only time that Blackbeard had confronted another Yonko was when he had fought against Whitebeard, who was practically on his deathbed at this point, and even then he was outclassed in every aspect. While his mastery over the Gura Gura no Mi will have strengthened him since, I simply cannot imagine Blackbeard facing off against Kaido, Big Mom, or even Shanks and coming away as a victor. I will admit though that without understanding the full capabilities of the Yami Yami no Mi, which remains one of the most mysterious and potentially powerful devil fruits in the series, there will always be this aspect of uncertainty in regards to Blackbeard's true power. While we have seen more showcases of Blackbeard's strength very recently in the manga, it's mainly his reputation and his presumption of strength based on his role in the narrative that results in Blackbeard being ranked so highly by people. Of course, this isn't a bad thing. Until recently, this was the same method we had used to assess Shanks' strength, and this is still something that fans do for characters like Mihawk and even Monkey D. Dragon. Unfortunately though, it prevents me from ranking Blackbeard any higher than here on this list. Next up we have the B tier, which consists of Marineford, Whitebeard, Big Mom, and Luffy. Marineford Whitebeard is a simple one, and I will be differentiating between this version of Whitebeard and his prime, which as you would expect is a lot higher on this list. Whitebeard in his final years was still a monster, but unfortunately even Haki cannot overcome the woes of time. Garp, Rayleigh, and Whitebeard all confirmed at some point that their advanced age was a considerable hindrance, and that their strength at present is a far cry from what it would have been in their respective primes. Aside from the visual indication of Whitebeard's weakness from the medical equipment that maintain his health, it is stated by Marco at Marineford that Whitebeard had gotten weaker when he was unable to detect or dodge squad's attack. This was followed up by his inability to use Conqueror's Haki in order to save Ace on the execution platform. Yes, the very Conqueror's Haki, which is almost essential now in all top level fights in One Piece. All of these factors combined prove that Whitebeard's abilities are a far cry from what he was previously capable of. Of course, this hardly detracts from just how intimidating a figure that he still manages to be. To be honest, Whitebeard should have been able to kill Akainu if it were not for the presence of some considerable plot armor. And as I'd mentioned earlier, he had completely outclassed Blackbeard in their fight. And that's to say nothing of the destruction that he had managed to cause during the Marineford War, which we can only assume was with him holding back in order to not harm Ace. So combining all of this, we can conclude that while Whitebeard was weakened, he was still a completely terrifying opponent to face. Now moving on to Big Mom, and after reviewing her actions in the series, I can only highlight how inconsistent she has been as a character, ranging from fearsome in Whole Cake Island to sometimes comical in Wano. There is a reason, however, that she has maintained such a terrifying reputation on the seas, and in moments when the sheer pressure from her Conqueror's Haki, which is capable of crippling some of the most powerful characters in the series. She demonstrates this during the Whole Cake Island arc when she screams after Mother Caramel's picture is broken. If you want some reference for the difference and strength between a Yonko and the Yonko commander, then just look at the way that Big Mom had treated Marco in Wano. Marco, just to point out, is someone who is capable of holding his own against admirals. He had fought against Blackbeard and had lived, and he had fought 2 versus 1 against King and Queen and had managed to hold them off for a decent amount of time. And when he had faced off against Big Mom, she straight up just grabbed him by the throat and told Peros to kill him while she was holding him. She really is a monster by every definition of the word. Now lastly within this tier we have Luffy, and Luffy's Gear 5 ability has without a doubt launched him into the level of strength befitting that of a Yonko, especially when you consider that it was this ability that quite literally had allowed him to take down Kaido. However, while this power is undoubtedly Luffy's trump card, it should be remembered that it took 2 rounds of Gear 5 in order to actually defeat Kaido, the second of which Kaido had seemed to suggest would be extremely detrimental to Luffy's overall health. Of course, Luffy forcefully using abilities that actually use up his lifespan is a trope that has been done surprisingly frequently throughout all of One Piece, being seen first in both Enies Lobby against Rob Lucci and in Marineford, just to name a few instances. And then we have to consider what the outcome of a fight would be between Luffy and Kaido without outside influences, because when you begin to view things from that perspective, you might start to see why Luffy is in this tier. Ultimately, in a one-on-one fight, I do not have Luffy beating Kaido or Big Mom. Now I'm pretty confident that this statement will spark a lot of disagreement because the climax of the Wano arc quite literally ended with Luffy defeating Kaido in a one-on-one fight, but was it really 1 versus 1 for the entirety of the battle? For context, the battle against Kaido and Big Mom ultimately consisted of Luffy teaming up with the 7 Scabbards, 4 members of the Worst Generation, Kaido's child, that would be Shogun of Wano, and the former first mate of Whitebeard. While not at the level of a Yonko, each of those that I have just listed is extremely powerful in their own right. Even after some of them had split off in order to fight against Big Mom, I genuinely do not think that you can claim that Luffy's fight against Kaido can truly be classed as a one-on-one fight. Kaido took a non-insignificant amount of damage before facing off against Luffy, and even then Luffy required a decent amount of plot armor in order to win the fight after being saved from certain death, and literal death on multiple different occasions. Now if Luffy had Gear 5 from the start, it may have been a different story, but even then I'm not entirely sure. Gear 5's biggest weakness is its time limit. This was showcased by Luffy failing to remain in the state while fighting Kaido and having to forcefully re-enter it. Even in the Egghead Island arc, we see Luffy visibly exhausted after using the ability in his fight against Rob Lucci. While the power of Gear 5 is undeniable, whether or not it would be able to break down the most durable creature in the world in an even fight before the ability's time limit is reached is a totally different story. It should be remembered though that among all of the Yonkos, no one has as much room for improvement as Luffy. His growth in strength over the last 2 years in the series has been nothing short of remarkable, and I think that it's nothing to be ashamed of with the fact that he doesn't yet rank top among the strongest characters in the One Piece world, who factually speaking are in their primes, but I'll get to them shortly. Moving on to the A tier, we have the strongest creature in the world himself, Kaido, King of the Beasts. Now there is some discrepancy in my weighing of character strength when you consider that Big Mom and Kaido seemingly fought to a standstill in Wano, but this obviously wasn't an all-out fight since neither side used the majority of the techniques that they had employed during their rooftop fighting on Onigashima. It would be reasonable if you guys personally have Big Mom and Kaido in the same tier, but personally I couldn't imagine Kaido losing to the combined might of Law and Kid like how Big Mom did, and on the other hand I can imagine Big Mom losing to Gear 5, which gives Kaido the edge for me. Likewise, I would kind of consider Kaido's Devil Fruit to lend its strength to combat far more than Big Mom's does, since a significant portion of her Devil Fruit relies on an opponent being fearful of her. Not to say that it doesn't also provide a decent boost in strength, but to me at least it simply doesn't compare to Kaido's Devil Fruit. It may also seem unusual to have someone one level higher than the person who beat them, but as I had mentioned earlier, the fight against Kaido was heavily in Luffy's favor, and besides, the discrepancy between each tier in terms of strength is not actually that huge except for the likes of Buggy. In terms of durability, no character has displayed more impressive feats than Kaido. The entirety of the climax of the Wano arc was essentially an exercise just to see how many people it would actually take in order to bring down the strongest creature in the world, and in no one's surprise, a lot of teamwork was required to defeat him. Beyond that, he was confident enough in himself to attempt to charge straight into Marineford just so that he could take on Whitebeard and presumably the entirety of the Marine Force while he was there. His mythical Zoan Devil Fruit gave him the ability to fly, harnessing control over various different elements, fierce dragon claws, and the strength to hold up the entirety of Onigashima and fly it for hours while fighting. In a one-on-one fight, you should never bet against Kaido. That is, unless your name is Redhead Shanks, who of course is the first of our entrants to take the place in the lofty heights of S rank. Up until recently, Shanks was one of the most difficult characters in all of One Piece to scale, simply with the fact that he had never outright attacked anyone. This had all changed in one of the most recent manga chapters where we finally see the Redhead Emperor release his oppressive power, and what a power it was. He had utterly destroyed both Captain Kidd and his right-hand man Killer in just a single blow. In fact, I would even argue that no other attack that we have seen thus far in One Piece has ever been as powerful as the one that Shanks had delivered to them. Kidd and Killer combined may not have been quite as powerful as Kidd and Law, but the fact remains that the pair had only recently contributed significantly to the defeat of Big Mom. For them to get so completely outclassed by Shanks simply shows how powerful of a Yonko he truly is. Even before we had learned about the truth of Shanks' strength, it had long since been speculated just how powerful he was based solely on the reputation that he has within the world. We know that he used to fight against Mihawk, the undisputed strongest swordsman in the world, and with the fights being so impressive that even Whitebeard had acknowledged them. His presence alone was sufficient to end the Marineford War and to convince Kaido not to interfere, as well as scaring off Blackbeard for the time being at least. Now, while not technically a Yonko, I feel this video wouldn't really be complete without putting Goldie Roger firmly at the top of this list. He is, after all, the one and only person in One Piece's history to ever be granted the title of Pirate King, and he had kickstarted the golden age of piracy. He was the strongest, with quite literally no one surpassing him in strength. To put his strength into context though, he was strong enough to walk into Big Mom's territory, steal her poneglyph, and sailing away without her being able to do anything against him. He managed managed to bring down the previous strongest pirate in the world in his legendary fight against Rox D. Zebek alongside Monkey D. Garp at God Valley. The only pirate in all the seas who could hope to stand equally alongside Roger was Whitebeard in his prime, who also gets placed in S rank. Prime Whitebeard was Roger's equal in every sense of the word, with it being mentioned throughout the series that the main reason Roger had become Pirate King and had reached Laugh Tale was simply because Whitebeard wasn't interested in becoming the Pirate King. Their battles against one another were supernatural spectacles that the anime had a spectacular time in showcasing, and if you wanted some justification for how these two completely outstrength all of the others on this list, have a quick look at the difference in the fights Odin had against Roger and against Kaido. While the stakes were completely different, the disparity in strength becomes pretty plain to see. Now, it is always possible that we will soon learn something new that completely disproves any of the placements in this ranking, or one of the characters experiences a power up in strength, but I would be interested in hearing what all of you think about the list as it currently stands. Let me know all of your thoughts of how you would rank the Yonko in the comments below. If you enjoyed this type of power scaling video, then definitely let me know your feedback in the comments, because I'd love to do a similar ranking for all of the different warlords. As always, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next One Piece video.
If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.